All right, we are live. Hello, welcome to Synthesis Review Introduction Paragraphs. This is such an exciting topic because it's going to be really quick, pretty straightforward and to the point. So I want to get started as quickly as possible. We're going to leave about a minute and 30 seconds for some people to flow in, but in the meantime, first, I want to talk about 35 minutes, and actually, I would say more like 30 minutes, maybe even 25, depending on audience participation. We're first going to cover what synthesis is, go into the rubric and the course exam description, talking about how to write introduction paragraphs, providing some samples, and then practice. So I'm going to preface this with the few people that are in the stream right now. I cannot talk to myself for 35 minutes. Like, it's not going to work good for me. You're going to get bored out of your mind. So what I definitely need is audience participation. I need engagement because I'm here to help you all out. Not just for me to rant and lecture to a screen, because you all already get that at school. So ask any questions you have ever. Feel free to interrupt me. Just leave them in the chat or the Ask a Question tab. If you need clarification, once again, feel free to ask. And whenever I ask y'all to give me feedback on certain things, I'd really appreciate it if you answer too, because it makes it more engaging for me and for you. So let's first talk about what synthesis is. So it's taking a position while incorporating given sources to create a conversation. So it means that you're taking maybe a news article, a press release, maybe some data from the US Department of Energy or US Department of Agriculture, and making your argument stronger. I would say that it's most similar to a history DBQ, except you're not doing that like hip happy analysis. And it's also similar to, it's basically an argument essay with sources and analysis. That's pretty much it. So in terms of the course and exam description and our rubric, according to College Board, they say that the way that you're supposed to do synthesis is that you are analyzing multiple sources in a concert with one another that broadens the context, given that these sources are representing different and often opposing stakeholders. So as I mentioned in last week's stream about synthesis overview, every single AP Lang synthesis essay is graded the same way on a 6-point rubric. 1 point for thesis, 4 points for evidence and commentary, and 1 point for sophistication. So your introduction will mainly deal with that thesis point, and maybe sophistication. So for that thesis point, all you have to do is write a thesis that responds to the prompt, and you can also develop a line of reasoning. And in terms of sophistication, in terms of your thesis, it means that you are creating a thesis that requires nuanced consideration of text evidence, which is a little bit vague, and we haven't really seen essays that have gotten the sophistication point from this subheading, because once again, this is the first year that we're using the 6-point system, the first year that sophistication has ever existed. So like situating your thesis within a broader context, we also really haven't seen points incorporated for that. But those are 2 ways that you can get sophistication in your synthesis essay. So how do you write an introduction paragraph? It seems really complicated, but it's actually not that bad whatsoever. So the first thing you do before you even think about the introduction is that you absolutely have to go through the sources. So on the AP Lang exam, you get about, I think, 2 hours to write your 3 essays, and that includes what's called a 15-minute reading period. So I would say that you allocate that time in which you're using about 7 to 8 minutes for synthesis reading, and the rest of the 7 minutes or so on your rhetorical analysis essay and on your argument essay, maybe writing out a little outline of a thesis and what you want to do for those other 2 prompts. So after you look through your 6 to 7 sources, usually what I do is I make a T-chart. So I write which sources are pro this, which sources are con this, because you'll get an essay that basically asks you to list some factors, maybe make a stance, something like that. So step 1, which is technically optional, is adding context in the first 2 sentences. So kind of giving a background, talking about why this issue is important. Step 2 is writing your thesis statement that directly responds to the prompt and it's not restating it. And then step 3 is adding your line of reasoning. It's very similar to the argument introduction, except you're looking at sources in the synthesis essay. And if I'm going too fast, which I feel like I kind of am, once again, feel free to let me know, and I'll go over something a little slower. I'll try and explain it a different way. That's ideally what I want to do. So let's look at some sample introduction paragraphs. So we have our prompt here from last year. It says, write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the most important factors that an individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm. So here's the thing. The last part of the sentence is what you actually have to answer, which is write an essay that develops your position on the most important factors that an individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm. So in your thesis, it is absolutely necessary that you include, you tell what those factors are. Because if you say there are many factors that an individual should consider, that would not get you the thesis point because you're not saying what those factors actually are. So let's look at this first example. As wind farms continue to proliferate all across the United States, which is sort of context, the individuals and agencies establishing and supporting them ought to carefully ponder wind farms' effects on local national economies and human comfort / quality of life as their most important considerations. So as you can see here, they very explicitly delineate those 2 factors that need to be considered: the effects on local national economies and human comfort / quality of life. Pretty simple. So as you can see, this is an option. Many people for their introduction paragraphs write their thesis statement and maybe a little bit of background before it. That works completely fine. I think it gets straight to the point, and you can develop your sophistication point later on by maybe talking about a counter argument or rebuttal, something like that. But this is a more developed introduction paragraph. And I can see that my profile picture here is cutting it out a little bit. So I'm going to see what I can do. Maybe I can move myself. I don't think I can. But it says, the establishment of wind turbines and wind farms is a newly risen controversial topic in society. So this is getting into that context. It's saying, when we're talking about wind farms in general, this is a pretty new concept. In fact, wind farms started in around the late 2010s. And then it gives another argument. Wind turbines are a modern energy source that's a typo, that is clean and reusable, but come with a price. Wind turbines are, it's not a typo. Many argue that prices and few drawbacks outweigh the benefits. Then we see that the last sentence answers the prompt. There are many factors to consider when establishing a wind farm, including environment advantages, economics, and potential health issues. So as you can see, this is more of a developed argument in terms of giving 2 sentences of context, talking about how wind turbines came to be. Either option A or option B will give you the thesis point. And in fact, when we look at the end scores of these 2 introduction paragraphs, essay, that first one right here got a 6, and this one, this first paragraph got a 141, it got full 6 points, and the second one here only got 4 points, 1 and 3. So it shows that you don't have to have the most developed introduction in order to get all 6 points. And just because you have a longer paragraph doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get a better score. Remember, AP English language is all about quality over quantity. If you're writing 12 body paragraphs and none of them are very developed, it's worse than just doing like 2 really developed body paragraphs. It doesn't really make sense. So yeah, are there any questions about the sample introduction paragraphs? Anything you want to know about synthesis, something like that? I'd be happy to answer them. I'll give you about a minute or so to ask me some questions. All right, I don't see any questions, so we'll keep going. Okay, so let's do some practice. And like I mentioned earlier, I really want interaction. So please don't make me sit here for 2 minutes staring at a gray chat box. There is no wrong answer. There is no right answer. It is English. It's not calculus. It's not biology. It's not memorization. It's your interpretation. That's what makes English language pretty great. And I think it's probably one of the easier tests to score 4 or 5 on. So let's read this prompt together. Eminent domain is the power governments have to acquire property from private landowners for public use. The rationale behind eminent domain is that governments have greater legal authority over lands within their dominion than do private owners. Eminent domain has been instituted in one way or another throughout the world for hundreds of years. Carefully read the 6 sources found on the AP English Language and Composition 2018 exam, question 1, including the introductory information for every source. Notice that this part is the prompt. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the notion that eminent domain is productive and beneficial. So I'm going to copy this link for y'all. I want you to look through the 6 sources, and for the next, that says 8 minutes, I'm going to have y'all in 8 minutes look through the sources and write your introduction paragraph in the chat. It can be just a 1-sentence thesis. It can be a 3-sentence thing with context and everything. Do what makes you feel most comfortable, and remember, there is no wrong answer. And please don't leave me hanging. So I'll give y'all your 8 minutes starting now, and then I'll check in with y'all. Alrighty, this is half of your time. So keep on working. Make sure that you're answering the prompt and send your introduction paragraph in the chat. I see that I just have a few people now, so it's okay. No one's judging. We're all here to be like a family and support each other. So there's no wrong answer. Don't be afraid to answer in the chat. I'd really appreciate it. For the person that just joined in, hello. Welcome to AP Lang Synthesis Review Introduction Paragraphs. Right now we're practicing how to write synthesis intro paragraphs. So this is our prompt here. I've sent a link in the chat, and basically we're just having everybody share their introduction paragraphs on this topic. You have about 3 minutes left. So use your time, I guess, to the fullest extent. And yeah, I'll check in with y'all in a few minutes. All right, and that's time's up. So for now, I'll send my introduction paragraph in, and we'll look at it. So rather than finding ways to use public land, eminent domain is unproductive and detrimental, as it ultimately hurts property owners and marginalized communities in favor of government and corporate interests. So I would say that this answers the prompt. Develop your position on the notion that eminent domain is productive and beneficial. I say that it's unproductive and detrimental because it hurts property owners and marginalized communities in favor of other interests. So I would say that answers the prompt. All right, we'll go over to the next prompt. This time, I'm going to give a little less time because I know 8 minutes seemed like a lot. So let's just do maybe 6 minutes. And I'll send the link here. So write a thesis, an introduction paragraph. And yeah, I'd really appreciate some insight. So it looks like that's our 8-minute mark. And here is what I ended up coming up with. It's pretty long because as you can see, there's that and underlined, which indicates that you have to answer both sides of the prompt. Celebrating our heroes is critical to ensure that they're forever ingrained and remembered in history. However, memorials and monuments typically take decades to be created in order to honor an individual. The factors a group or agency should consider when memorializing an event or person include their legacy, historical context, and effects on others. Moreover, when creating a monument, it is best to ensure that cultural sensitivities and proper dedication is provided. So as you can see, that answers both sides of the prompt, and it goes into very much detail as to what needs to be considered. So I'm actually going to give the last 3 minutes or so a Q&A kind of open session. So ask me anything you have about AP English language. I can answer questions about most AP classes with the exception of like physics and microeconomics and statistics and environmental science. But other than that, I have a pretty good grasp on a lot of subjects, and then 5able overall, I'd be happy to answer. Oh, looks like I crashed that. Well, all right. I think that's it in terms of questions. If you have more, you can leave them in the chat and I'll just answer them by typing. Thank you all so much for joining me. Really appreciated it. And yeah, I will see you next week.